Okay, hello, welcome back to the GigCX Decoded podcast. This is where we dive into the world of gig-based customer service, or GigCX as we like to call it. And it's brought to you by Limitless. And in my humble opinion, as always, we are the world's leading GigCX platform. But I can say that because I'm Chris, I'm your host, and I'm the Chief Sales Officer here at Limitless. And on this podcast, we go into more detail around what the concept of GigCX is, and just to do a quick intro about what GigCX is all about. It is to allows businesses to crowdsource their customer support by routing digital inquiries to crowds of passionate brand experts, typically brands' own customers that are onboarded as crowds. So that's what it is. That's what we're talking about. And today I'm very excited to be joined by Merijn. And Merijn, before I hand over to you to say hello, I'm going to openly say that I've never pronounced your surname out of my mouth before. So I'm going to not do that. I'm not going to do that and get it wrong. So Merijn, correct me. How do I pronounce your surname to start with?
Well, it's very simple. It's just difficult when you read it. So it's Merijn to Booj, which is not super complex, I think, when you listen to it. But when you read it, it becomes very kind of mystifying almost. And there's no problem at all. I've been working outside the Netherlands for quite some time. My parents clearly never thought I would work outside the Netherlands when they came up with this name. It's actually a little bit more complex than the one I go with internationally. But nobody that doesn't speak Dutch is able to pronounce it in any decent fashion. So I listen to almost anything that gets close to it. So totally fine.
There we go. Okay, well, thank you for that. But anyway, so look, it's fantastic to have you on. Thank you for joining the show. We're into a few of these now, and we're walking our way around all of the contributors to the GigCX annual report that Limitless produces, really just to get a bit more conversation going about your perspective. And the report can be quite formal. You're going to be quoted and things. So this is a good chance for you to ad lib a little bit more and talk about your own personal experience and obviously where you're coming from. So you were a contributor to the report and on behalf of Genesys, and I guess in case anybody's been living on Mars, do you want to just introduce what you do for Genesys, but also who Genesys is and what they do in the industry? That'd be a good place.
So I've been with Genesys for quite some time, since 2000 actually, and done many different things. Currently, I'm the general manager for the business unit that focuses on our workforce engagement management portfolio. Mm-hmm. So that's all our solutions that we build around employee experience, really, planning-wise, analytics-wise, but also the engagement element that I think is becoming more and more relevant. That's a part of our solution. Genesys has been around for quite some time. Started really as a more traditional contact center vendor, but always has been on the edge of innovation. And we've been trying to transform ourselves every couple of years because we feel this industry is growing, changing, innovating quite heavily. And we've been doing that successfully, kind of leading us to a leadership position at a global scale from a contact center or customer experience perspective. Very happy with that. And now really moving to an experience as a service vendor, in which it all comes together, right? The employee experience, the customer experience, proper personalization, stepping away from the old-fashioned KPIs that are very focused on productivity, much more focused on what the outcome really is that we want to achieve between customer and enterprise. And that's what we're building software for. We do that with about 8,000 people worldwide, and we got an incredibly interesting set of partners on all sides of the ecosystem, including Limitless for the gig economy.
Excellent. There we go. So, I mean, like I say, if anyone's in the contact center or CX world, you'd be it'd be mad for you not to know who Genesys are. I think you're the biggest provider of biggest provider. Would you say across the industry?
I'm sorry?
Biggest provider, would you say, across the industry?
We are the biggest provider across the industry. We initially started as a high-end provider, right? So the really large and extra large enterprise. But over the last few years, we've made great inroads into the mid-market, even SMB as well. And that all combined, I would argue that we are the biggest one. It's always a bit of a definition question, right? Market share, how do you define it? We are the biggest one. What I'm most proud of, though, is that we have a large set of almost every customer being happy with what we're doing, which I think is an important measure, I think, that kind of defines the size of your company.
Yeah. Yep, excellent stuff. Righty-ho. Right, well, let's get into a few of the questions. So, I mean, the first one is a really good place to ask is really what impact do you think that GigCX is having on the customer service industry right now?
I, I think it's a longer story than just a one-line answer on this one. A lot of stuff has happened over the last couple of years. And I think that every country, wherever you go, you'll find a hard time finding resources to do jobs. And we see that everywhere in the Netherlands where I live, but in the US and in any society that we try to work with, we see that problem. And I think a large part of that has been the fact that we're trying to do this in the old-fashioned way, and which is not human-centric at all. We're trying to have this productivity sum that we're trying to answer to, and I don't think that's where we want to go. I think the gig economy is becoming more relevant and becoming something that people talk about, because the way that we hire, train, onboard, and work with people is changing very, very rapidly. And ultimate flexibility, but also quality, I think, are elements that are becoming more and more relevant. I think 70% of what makes a company is the service that they deliver. And if you then think you can do that in an old-fashioned way by automating stuff a ton, or by just going down the BPO route, or keep on hiring the way that we were hiring in the past, and automating everything that you don't want to go to your agents, that's a very negative approach, I think. So there's a much more positive approach in which intent really defines what you want to do with your customers. And this is really where gig economy, gig experts come into play, right? Because they deliver, on the one side, human empathy and quality and elements like that. They also deliver incredible flexibility in the way that they work, in the way that they see work and life and career choices, which adds a ton of value to the more traditional viewpoints that a lot of HR staff still has. But even in the context center where we live, which is technology invested, we still see a lot of people thinking old school, and it's good to see that is changing, and there's becoming a much more human central view on what customer service is all about. And I believe gig experts are a missing link in that entire story.
Good stuff. Yeah, I mean, I just want to pick up on something you mentioned there, which is I think you sort of called it the old school way, which is about automation and BPOs. Do you think there's a sort of movement right now to that's gone so as far as it can go, or do you feel that there's less focus on that because it's can only achieve a certain thing, and there's more focus now around the experience? Or what do you do you think something's changing, and if so, what do you think it is?
I think there are some things changing, slow, but I think that the companies that really see this in a very good new light are understanding very well that you can't do one without the other, really. And I'm not here to say you should not use BPOs. I think BPOs have a really good role to play, but I think it's important that you understand what that role really is. If you look at your contract with your BPO, I would argue that not many contracts will contain the word, I'm going to pay you for quality that you deliver. I think that BPOs by nature are very transactional and very quantity focused, and rightly so. That's what we needed, right? We had kind of an abundance of volume. We need to get rid of volume, so let's get that volume to the BPO domain. That's the role that they have, and I think that's a fair role, and that role will still stay there for certain demographics, for certain maybe not completely clear intents that you might have in the domain. If you have volume that you want to move somewhere from a campaign perspective, which is just replication, and you don't want to automate that, right? So that's where they play, and I think they should still stay there. But there's this world in between, and it's kind of provoked by, I think, asynchronous messaging that requires continuous conversations, that requires empathy, that requires a central human viewpoint. But sometimes they are either ongoing in conversational mode, or they are just not ready for a primary agent. So there's this gig expert domain that has an incredible amount of empathy, quite often more than your primary agent, because hopefully they've been there, they see this, they have experienced exactly what this customer is looking for or asking for. And then they come with this possibility of making them almost like concierges, right? So they can work incredibly complex shifts, really. They can work 1 hour here, 15 minutes there, 10 minutes there. And primary agent in your contact center would never be able to do that.
Right.
In your outsourced environment, you will never be able to go there, right? Automation doesn't have the empathy that you would require. So there's a really important role for the gig expert in this domain to add value, add flexibility, add empathy and humanity to the primary and BPO agents. I think the biggest trick, though, and that's where I see the new viewpoints becoming clearer and clearer, is to do this holistically. And you can't say, I'm going to do this with my primary agent, and I'm going to do that with my gig expert, and that with my BPO. It simply doesn't work that way. I think everybody needs to understand that contact center management or operations or customer engagement is becoming super real time. And so you can't just block it up and think that you'll be fine. That's strategy based on hope. I don't think hope is the right way to go.
Do you think, like you mentioned there about asynchronous messaging coming out? So the way I when we introduced Limitless and what GigCX is, I mean the first thing I always do, I mean it's probably a bit tongue in cheek, but I'll say to people, has anyone here had taken an Uber or a Lyft? Or stayed in Airbnb, or had their food delivered by Deliveroo or Just Eat, and everyone goes, "Yep, show of hands." I go, "Okay, great." And does anybody here use WhatsApp to talk to their friends? And then everyone goes, "Yep, I'll put my hand up." Okay. And when you look for some form of recommendation, like, I mean, I'll give you an example. Actually, I was I needed to buy my girlfriend a present. It was like an electric drum kit, so it's really random, right? But I know nothing about drums. I'm very good at tapping on the desk. Apparently I'm one of the world's best at that, but that's self-proclaimed. And so I was like, I'm going to go in the market to buy these, and you go into Amazon or the web, whatever. I mean, it's just hundreds, right? So what did I do? I picked up my phone, I went onto WhatsApp, I asked a bunch of my buddies, does anybody know anything about this? Someone put their hand up and said, "Yep." And they replied about half an hour later with a recommendation. I'm like, human nature. That's my human nature now, is to pick up a digital device, ask a question using an asynchronous messaging tool, and somebody who was able to put their hand up and say, "Yeah, I know the answer to this. Here's my recommendation," came in. I'm like, that's actually not too dissimilar to what GigCX is all about, which is bringing the everyone's familiar with sort of forums and communities, which is when you've got huge numbers of people that turn up to these websites with the knowledge, but they work on their own time and they've got their own product knowledge and they do it out of their own self-belief, right? And really all that's happening is we're bringing that in. But the question I have for you was around asynchronous messaging. And do you think, because if you went back in the day, you had originally it was just voice, right? Just voice, and that was it. And that was real time, as long as once you got connected, which could be hours, right? But you're talking to someone, it's real time. And then email came along, and even now I still get emails back to say, "Thank you for email, we'll come back to you within 5 business days." You're like, I mean, what's all that about? And then you've got social media and other live chat sort of in the middle of all of that. What do you think the kind of perception is around asynchronous messaging in a customer service environment, as opposed to voice being instant and email taking potentially days?
From a kind of enterprise perspective or from a consumer perspective?
From more of a consumer perspective, really.
But you're right. It still blows my mind that when you send an email, sometimes an email is the more formal way of communicating, that you then get an answer. By the way, you always get this answer from a box that you can't reply to, which is the most annoying trick. And I don't understand why that is. I think it ruins their data more than it does mine. But I do think that the overarching or the more compelling way to communicate with an enterprise these days seems to be asynchronous, because you can do what you want, which kind of implies that an enterprise can also create some flexibility around the way that they want to communicate with you, as long as they do, right? So as soon as you start making promises, then you need to keep your promise. And if you want to over-deliver, then under-promise. And I think that asynchronous is an incredibly good way to do so for your consumers. I still think that voice is a channel, and the pandemic showed it quite easily. It's not going to go away. It's going to stay. No. It's going to be relevant for certain intents. And those are all intents that I think require a human element. And that might be sarcasm or irony, but most often it's empathy and confirmation, right? I listened to a lot of these conversations when the pandemic started, and all these customers were calling airlines and hotels and for confirmation of their cancellation or anything like that, voucher. Apparently, the automation that was in place wasn't good enough, right? It didn't give them the feeling that they got this confirmation or this feeling. Funny enough, with asynchronous, we see this more. So because people got the opportunity after they got the confirmation to ask a question. So this is the actual confirmation. And yes, this is the actual confirmation. So the companies that do this in a smart way are using asynchronous in a almost voice-like confirmation or human capability. Which I think is a great way to communicate. It's much better than chat, right? Chat is almost the same as voice these days. You're waiting on a website, and in all reality, you're just waiting for the person to answer, right? The number of times that people are staring blindly to those three dots is there an answer coming, yes or not? It doesn't really happen with asynchronous, and which is a good thing. That being said, I think that a lot of people, when something needs to be decided now, will still go for either chat or the voice channel, right? So I need an answer now. I can't wait 24 hours. I need it now. So I think that the intent kind of already defines where people will want to go with their question. That's also why I think that because one of the reasons you get this email 5 days from now is that email is a costly channel for an enterprise, and which is still a way of operating within a lot of these enterprises, right? Like a cost channel, engaging with your customers should not be a cost channel. It should be a channel in which you try to create service that will allow you to stand out. And cost should not even be a question, really, that is prime in your decision making on where to take your customers. So if I decide to use email, then I should get the same service level kind of anticipation, or have the same service of anticipation as any other channel. There should not be a real difference between it. And technology allows you to do that. So leverage that technology. People allow you to do that. If you want to leverage more people, right? And different kind of people. And again, this is where gig experts can play a great role as well, especially around email. Right? There's no reason why email should delay you or slow you down. There's just no reason for it. So that's how I would see it. But I do think that asynchronous is, and I created a forecast in 2015 where I said that asynchronous would be bigger than chat and email by 2020. And I was wrong. So I was wrong in more than one thing, but this one I was wrong at because it didn't take off as quick as I thought. And the main reason for it not taking off was that enterprise were afraid that they would open the floodgates and have no clue what to do with it. Right. So as soon as you open WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger or whatever the dominant channel is, it's really hard to just close it again. You can't say at 5 o'clock my agents are going to go. That's not how synchronous works, right? It's always there, it's always open. And they were really afraid that the volume they would get would so spike so heavily that they would not be able to handle it. So they kind of artificially slowed it down. They kept it lit. They had some automation in there. Some of them went to Apple Business Chat, but really didn't take off all that much on that side of the house. So somewhere down the road, the customer pressure became so immense, and I think that everybody that was making the decision started using an asynchronous tool as well. So it suddenly really became part of your own life. And if that's the case, my teenager would not go anywhere else to communicate. Right? Actually, right now, my daughter is 20 years old, so an adult, is talking to her driving instructors to find a driving instructor for her Dutch driver's license. I had to kind of coach her on how to have that conversation, partly because of her Dutch, but partly because she doesn't use the phone at all. Right? She's not used to using the phone. So why can't I just
you have to coach her on what to say and kind of how to say it.
These guys are not on messaging, so you have to call them. So it's an old-fashioned way of doing business, but there you go. And so her dominant behavior is to go directly to WhatsApp in this scenario. My son does the exact same thing, and she's 20, so she will expect that she can do any business like she does it in private, and that's where asynchronous will stand the test of time, will become the biggest one in the next decade or so from all the digital channels.
But you've picked up on a really important point there, I think, which is every year that goes on, the customer base, if you like, that want to ask these questions to the brands are using social media or asynchronous messaging more prolifically than they would, perhaps an older generation that is. I remember voice. If I really want to get hold of someone, I'm gonna go down this route. But at the same time, the workforce, that are in the contact centers are, when they enter the employment age, they're also used to this, way of working as well, and are probably less used to a different topic, which maybe we'll cover off in a minute, but are less used to. I was having this conversation with a family member the other day, and I was saying, in 15 or so years' time, when my daughter goes to work, we'll be having this conversation. We're saying, years ago, Daddy used to go to an office. He used to go on a train or get in a car, and he used to drive an hour and a half to get to an office, and he used to sit on his bum all day in a building that was air conditioned. It was too cold inside and too hot outside, and we used to sit there for 8 or 9 hours a day, and then I'd do the drive home. And it'd be like, well, why would you do that when the world is so connected with digital messaging or the flexible working? But the point I've gone around the houses on was to do with the kind of propensity for customers, and the every year that goes by, they're being more willing to, and actually their preference is to use more digital based communication as opposed to old ones, which leads me on to about awareness, really. So in the report that we did, and we surveyed loads of CX leaders from all different types of industry, actually, like yourselves on the enterprise side into actual owners and operators of contact centers. Half of them said they had awareness of GigCX, but 3/4 of those who follow my thread said that they were planning on bringing GigCX into their operations, which is, considering that this GigCX has only been around really for about six years or so. That's a huge amount of people that are now thinking about why that's coming in. Why do you think that level of awareness has increased so rapidly?
Well, partly due to reports like this, right, and the work that you guys are
Good
doing, and
answer.
sort of a little bit the work that we are doing as well. But I think there's just a problem that people are trying to solve that they can't really solve without opening their eyes and thinking out of the box. And I think that's where the gig economy becomes a topic. Like mixed realities is becoming a topic as well for the same problem solution, to be totally honest. The Great Resignation was a great name for a year, and after the pandemic, it was time to get something like that. But people struggle to find resources to do their jobs, and back to those generations, the millennials are already done and they're dusted, right? They're already in the workforce, so it's talking about Generation Z now.
Yeah.
They are really making different decisions right now. They are probably the first generation that really went through a pandemic in their teens. With lockdowns and not being able to go to school, the entire virtuality of the work, etc., became normal in their era. Not having a great war either, although that's apparently changing a little bit now with the Ukraine and Russia, but different than the generations before that. And they come in and they walk away, and they don't want to do this job, or they want a different job. And it was super hard for those people which were trained to onboard large amounts of people all the time,
right?
Because they knew they would be gone in 2 years. Suddenly, to not be able to find those people anymore to onboard, and change strategies and tactics to move away from this trick that we all mastered by getting thousands of agents through the door, train them, onboard them, train them, get them working, and then knowing that we just didn't spend a lot of time on them, and in 2 years they were gone, most of them anyway. To how do we make sure we keep our agents, right? How do we make sure that we make our agents relevant in everything that we do? So people that suddenly faced that problem needed to start looking at other solutions as well to augment the work that they were doing. I think that one of the more logical things is that you then go look outside at the BPO domain, and this is where the gig economy then becomes an alternative, because it's not the same. That being said, it's also not replacing it, right? It's just adding to the construct of your human pyramid, in all fairness, or your resource pyramid. And I think that's where people start kind of tapping into, this is an interesting way of doing it, maintaining quality, adding to my primary agent, not just to my volume question that I have. Be able to open my digitized channels that I was always afraid to open. And a lot of companies that in the pandemic said, we're good to go. We got everything automated. So they can go to the website and they will be fine. Turn out to not be right. And very quickly learned that what they actually did was cause a massive frustration with people moving away from the web back to the voice channel. So they missed this link between. And I think that's where the solution-oriented people started looking for solutions. And this is where gig economy became a topic. It is something to note, though, that only half of your population said, yeah, I'm aware of it, right? As soon as they're aware of it, they see this as a relevant investment. So if 75% of that half actually is investing in the gig economy,
yep.
it also means there's still a half of the population that doesn't know this yet and are probably still struggling with trying to find the right answer. So even more reason for reports like this to get a larger audience and get out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's our mission in this as well, as one of the pioneers of this industry, is to help educate the market. You know, I've been in this industry a very long time as well. My first ever job was in the contact center, and Roger and Megan, our founders, have run BPOs for over 20 years each. You know, the biggest problem they had, which is something you mentioned, was this constant conveyor belt of trying to find the talent in the first place, then train them, then coach them before they become live and productive, and then keep them in a market that is often paying minimum wages, and loyalty can be very liquid, and they can often move somewhere for a tiny pay increase or perk, or, you know, whatever it might be, or change in their working environment. And then you're back to trying to find more, trying to train more, trying to shadow them, and that an attrition is typically 50% within a 12 months, and all that was being seen at that stage was that the attrition numbers were getting higher, and the 2 points I think you mentioned was that it's the access to talent in the first place now. So it's now actually finding them in the first place to even introduce them to the conveyor belt, and that seems to be becoming more of an issue, which is then causing the leaders to think, look at alternative methods. And GigCX is one of those. You can obviously do more with automation. You can do more with self-serve, but as you mentioned, self-serve is only as good as if you've done that thing before. You can come back to it confidently. But a lot of these contacts are through people that are doing that thing for the first time. They may not have constant interactions with an organization. It may be they're one-off, or once every, they're moving house, or they're chasing up a delivery, or they've got a product that they didn't think was going to fail but has failed, or doesn't quite work with another product, the headphone syncing to something, or wherever it might be. So it's not like they're coached already in their minds to think, oh, this is how I do this sort of stuff. So that kind of guided self-service, is a nice way of describing where the gig economy can help, because you're tapping into people that they've been in your shoes, and they can offer that, they can offer that guidance. But I do, from what we've seen, you're absolutely right that half of them were unaware. So we've got a mission. The industry's got a mission to kind of educate people. But what we have seen in the last year since we did the report before was that the amount of leaders now talking about this coming into their organizations has increased. It feels like the perceptions of GigCX have changed, and there is a question there which I'll get to in a minute, which is about the gig economy covers any economy, right? You can, and there are organizations out there, which I'm not going to name, that have utilized gig as a way to drive even lower costs down, because they can get access to a workforce and effectively pay them the absolute lowest amounts that they can. Do you think the perceptions are changing amongst the leaders, and if so, how?
Well, I do think the perceptions are changing. Yes, I think they're changing. I think they're changing more on the side of effectiveness. I think one of the mistakes that a lot of leaders still make when they think about gig economy is that they think about it as a cost structure. It's nice that you can do it at low cost, but I think that the most important reason for gig economy to slice into the human the resource pyramid is the ability to get flexibility at a decent cost with a human angle and quality angle to it. That is paid in a different way than transactional or anything like that, right? So it's much more focused on the quality of what we actually deliver from hence result oriented, which I think is really important and much more valid for me. But I think that a lot of people, I think that the reason it's really shifting is that people are starting to realize that it can be effective. right? So it's not just an idea or a conceptual approach. It can be incredibly effective. And I was a bit surprised it took so long, because I believe that everybody knows that when you get a peer recommendation, like you told the story that you told about the electric drum kit, when you get a peer recommendation, you will take that more serious than when you get an enterprise recommendation. So peer recommendations are super important. That's the success of TripAdvisor, and companies like that are all based on that. So it's a little bit surprising to see that it took them so long to realize that when you do this in a gig world, you can leverage that concept, that element of it, very effectively. And I think it's something that you should understand as well, right? I can even argue that in certain intents, it might be better to let a person know you're going to talk to a gig expert who is not part of this company XYZ, but knows everything about what you're asking about. And I think that that answer will be treated more seriously than any company answer that you would require or get. I always gave the example when I was confronted by the government of labor, or whatever they call in the US. So, well, it can't work for us, right? So we don't have a loyal following. We don't have people. But no, you have tons of people on websites that are helping other people understand what it is like to apply for unemployment benefits. So there's millions of them, unfortunately, that have that experience, right? So there's a ton of people that could be gig experts in your domain as well. It's not limited to hotel reservations or retail. It works well in government as well, just because of the sheer fact that the load of empathy and the experience that those people have is available.
You've already covered off a bit around the sort of conversation function. Is there anything, before we go back in, is there anything you really wanted to talk about or highlight?
Well, the one thing, I think one of the questions I had, although I closed the document, is about the automation element of it, right? And I strongly feel that the self-service domain that we see today is still doing the same thing as we did with the IVR. So it's wrong. It's not adding any value, and it's not augmenting your resources at all. It's just trying to replace some, which I think is not the right way to do automation. So I think they should learn from conversations much more.
Okay. So what I'll do then, if I ask a question about, so the model that we like to talk about is, for us, the sort of utopian state is to understand the intent of the question, and from that decide based upon whether to route that to automation, route it to an in-house agent, or to bring GigCX in and having that ability, because you've got a sliding scale then of cost, automation being the cheapest, but typically CSAT being the lowest. And then you've got the other end of the scale, which is a human agent, where the cost is the highest, but also the CSAT is typically the highest because they're getting that, human interaction. And GigCX being somewhere in the middle. I'm not saying that CX is lower, often it's higher, but it just provides that sort of option really to optimize the contact that's coming in and route it to the most appropriate channel based upon cost and CSAT.
Yeah, so I don't think you should route it to the most appropriate channel, right? I think that we are, for the last 25, 30 years, we've been living and talking about this channel almost syndrome that we all have, multi-channel and omni-channel. I think that when you design an experience, we like the word frictionless, but it goes without saying almost. It should be almost a zero-channel experience, right? It doesn't really matter what channel we're talking about. At the end of the day, I've got somebody that is trying to engage with me as an enterprise that has a question or a problem, or maybe wants to buy something. Right. The more I know about this intent, the more accurate I will be in predicting what outcome will be the best for both of us, and how do I serve that outcome in the most proper way. And not necessarily the cheapest way, but in the best way. And if the best way is to go down an automated path, that's great. If the best way is to go down a human path, that's great as well. And if the human path is either a gig expert or a primary resource or even a BPO resource, then fine, based on what I'm trying to achieve, right? So the prediction of that outcome is AI, and we can do that these days, right? Yep. Routing is not about channels anymore. Routing is about the ability to predict what outcome I'm trying to achieve. So what is the most personalized experience I can deliver to this one person? And you're right. We always think that people call in like 17 times a year. That's nonsense, right? Actually, that amount would be somewhat awful and almost shocking. It's very rare that they do, and they kind of enter a lingo-loaded environment, which is hard for them to understand. Yet we think that they can self-serve themselves everywhere they go, which is, I think, somewhat naive and highly optimistic. And partly because we treat automation as a deflection element or a replacement element. And the first thing what you get when you go to a developer, can you create a bot to me, is that he will try to replace a human, right? Or mimic a human in its approach, which I don't necessarily think is the right approach. We tried this before with IVR, the interactive voice response in the 90s. I don't think you will find a lot of fans of the IVR that say, "Oh no, I love it when I call in, I get to type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and do that 17 times." It's not the way that automation really works well, right? People feel locked very quickly, and that's not what we're trying to replace with bots that are doing the exact same thing. So when you say somewhat carefully that probably the satisfaction is not the highest, it's not. It is the fastest rising dissatisfying channel that we have and see. Mainly because we're treating bots like we treated IVR ports, and we should stop doing that and start looking at how do we use these bots and this automation capability we now have because of all this data information that we have, and augment the human population that we have, because that will solve two things. First of all, it will solve your customer's problem, but it also solves your own human problem, right? So I can't find all these resources, so let me try to figure out how do I make sure that the population that I do have, like the 100 or 1,000 agents that I do have, supported by secondary and BPO resources, secondary being the gig resources, I know exactly what they can handle. So let me make sure that they get the conversation that really require their skill set. And that is human, that's empathy, sarcasm, irony, all those things that we talked about, conviction, convincing people of certain elements is the right product to buy. Humans are much better in that than bots are. Bots are much better in compliance statements, in billing, in replicating elements like address changes and stuff like that. So instead of creating separation between the two, let's augment these elements and make sure that whatever happens, the customer can always go from one to the next without any friction in between. But let's start with the one we think will serve the outcome in the best way. And if it doesn't, intercept that and make sure that we go to the next level of that path. That's not what we see a lot, right? What we see a lot is still this channel approach, silos building, people locked into the silo they can't get out of anymore, frustration building within that silo, and then leaving it, starting again. I used to call that the Dory effect when Finding Nemo came out, and it was resonated with that population. Generation Zs have never seen Finding Nemo, so they don't understand what I'm talking about. But yeah, don't stop kind of constantly repeating what you're doing. And we talked about that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's kind of weird that we still do that, right? And there's no need for it anymore. So serve, and let's use automation to augment the humans. And by the way, use your humans to augment your automation, right? It goes both ways. And I think if you do that, it becomes very logical to fit gig experts into your holistic view on what your resource pyramid should be like and what role they would play within that pyramid. And I think that's when you do that, you will find a solution for the problems that you have.
Yeah, I mean, there's some great stuff in there around. I perhaps didn't describe that very well, but around, I think, intent-based routing, and that's where bots could potentially help more is about, it may, almost like a conversation where you enter into an organization through whatever channel, and a bot says, I am a bot, for example, to start with, rather than trying to mask being human. So I'm a bot, and I'm going to now ask you a few questions. Then I'm going to route you to where I think is the most appropriate, channel for you, or the most appropriate resource pool. Effectively, let's refer it to that. Then it's more overt. Then it's more deliberate, and the customer thinks, okay, I'm not trying to, confuse a robot that is quite open. So I'm going to ask you these questions, and then this is then what I'm going to do next. Because, a prime example, yesterday I had a missed package, and I mean, this is the sort of, we're in 2022, and this is the experience I had yesterday, right? So I had a text to say we've tried to deliver a package and it wasn't, and you weren't at home.
Right.
The link in the text to book to the redelivery didn't work, so it went onto a website that didn't work. So I then found the website independently, used the package number that was on the text, and it wasn't long enough, so that didn't work. Then I go on to the can I help you robot thing that pops up in the corner, and it says, I'm only giving you these two options. You're either sending or receiving. I was receiving, and it said put in your package number. I said, okay, well, I can't get past this. So then it was like, do you have another? Is there some other issue? And I was like, yes. And it immediately defaulted to you must be reporting a problem about how we've damaged your car or your house. Well, no. And I went down this whole elaborate route purely just so I could get a package redelivered. But I've tried 3 different, the SMS thing just didn't work. So nobody's, like you said earlier about the email, where it either comes from a do not reply address to start with, or nobody monitors it in the first place. So if you're going to send something, expect to receive it back in that same format, because that's what we're conditioned to do. So it's just amazing how in some areas where they're trying so much to use automation to get rid of low level, low complexity inquiries, which mine was, and failing, and I'm now getting to the point where I'm now getting exasperated, and I'm trying to find different channels for me to call. That the next thing I was about to do was a phone call, and then I was going to God only knows where I'd be within all of that. But effort and ease is what is the world is all about, trying to make things easier and more effortless and frictionless for people. And if they knew what my question, if that bot said, had more intelligence to understand what it was I was calling about, the fact that it didn't even have an option for misdelivery, and they're a delivery company, I mean, you've got one job to do. There wasn't even an option for that. And
I think
then
it's a great example of probably a project that never included an agent, right?
Yeah.
So let's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
So like we'll just IT and management will work together and try to avoid you getting to a human, because that feels a little bit, that's deflection.
Yeah.
That's such a bad strategy that it might save you some cost, but in the long run, I think it's going to be more expensive to do it that way than to within that window that you were on their website. They should have figured out like 10 times that you had a problem that could not be solved by your website, but needed a human, because your number just didn't work, right? And they should have intercepted that immediately. So listen, the bot should have immediately said, I can't answer this for you. I'm going to add whoever to this conversation. And I would have argued it's probably better to move this to a voice channel, right? This was a problem that is easier to fix over a voice channel anyway. I had something similar. I actually ended up with the guy in the actual storage room that was sitting next to my package before the package was kind of retrieved. And it's amazing, but that's the case. And by the way, all these people that could work in a contact center are now working as couriers and delivering food and goods and stuff, because we're very so.
Well, right, we could talk for ages about this topic, but we'll probably be here for another couple of hours or so. So before we kind of wrap up, I mean, in your humble opinion, do you think GigCX is here to stay? Do you think it's going to grow? What's your prediction, based upon the fact that your last prediction didn't work quite as quickly as you thought? So
I had some that worked though, so it's not the only one. Apparently, the ones that don't work are more funny than the ones that actually did. No, it's here to stay. I don't think there's any debate about it. And even analyst firms like Gartner are now predicting that a large percentage of contact center agents that we see today will work under a contractual environment that's much similar to the gig economy than it is to a traditional employer contract, right? That will only be provoked by Generation Zs coming into the workplace at mass over the next decade. And if I look at my own kids, both of Generation Zs, they will like being able to work that way and, for instance, travel the globe, right? When you can work whenever you want. And I think it's an outcome for a lot of people as well from a contractual perspective. I think it also fits and solves and fills a gap that a lot of companies have. And so the ability for you to do peer recommendations is, I think, a great good, and hence because of that, I think it will grow and it will keep on growing. And that half of the population is not even aware of it. As soon as they will, I think it could be explosive too.
Good stuff. Okay. Well, Merijn, thank you for your time. It's been great as always talking to you. No doubt we'll see each other soon. For those listening, thank you. If you want to know more about the report, you can go to limitlesstech.com and you can easily download it there. And then stay tuned. Next one, we're walking our way around all of the great contributors to the report. And the next one will be out soon. And we'll get some more great insights to GigCX. Thanks for your time and stay tuned. We'll be in touch soon.